Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball. He dribbles through traffic, gets to the basket, and throws it down.
Out of bounds, Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network and brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me this week is the full cast of characters, Jasper Apollonia and Aaron Johnson. Fellas, the trade deadline ended 2.5 hours ago. How do we feel?
I'm glad it's over. I think the posturing by who some are calling scams, Sharania, was just at an all-time high this year at the deadline. I think last year in free agency and this year at the deadline, it just really goes to show how much Woj is missed in the online NBA community. And all of the talk that he gave us about Giannis, for there to be absolutely nothing in the end day, like nothing all day either. Like there was no like, hey, Minnesota's made this final push. This was their offer. This is the holdup. Like he spent the last 2 months of the season telling us Giannis is gone. Giannis is going to get moved just for it to not happen. This guy, is he on fraud watch? Maybe. I'm just glad the deadline is over so we can move on from all of the talk about guys getting traded that never end up getting traded.
Aaron, I'm going to jump on this pile-on with you because I am in total agreement. Scams Charania, absolutely true. You know the difference between him and Woj? Woj was really good at assessing the temperature of like how likely these things were to actually happen. Like guys were giving him information, but then he was taking his own assessment and going like, there's talk around this. That's it. Like, that's what he was saying. He wasn't going, buckle up, this is going to be crazy. So when something crazy did actually hit, you were surprised, and the Woj bomb hit instead of, this scam artist, this PR mouthpiece, just going on and saying, oh, stay awake, because that's what GMs are telling him. You know what I mean? It's just it's just a regurgitation. But to answer your question, Mike, I was going to say my main feeling is relief being out of this trade deadline. Look, the trade we all knew was going to happen. We knew Jaden Ivey was going to be gone. The Pistons, they ripped off the Band-Aid. They got it over with. I think we should talk a little bit about, why they traded Jaden Ivey and why they got back what they got in Kevin Huerter. But yeah, relief, ultimately. We got to move past this. The Pistons did pick up a player that, we'll talk about him. There are some ways I see him really helping the Pistons this year. I think there are some definite question marks around Kevin Huerter. But look, Trajan Langdon got to get it over with.
Back there.
He got to get it over with, and he got to go and have fun in the ball pit. So that's a good thing for all of us. And really quickly, before we get into it all, I was doing the math really fast today, and I realized in regards to those FanDuel odds of the Pistons winning the NBA title, if the Pistons were to win 61 games in the regular season and win the NBA title, they would have won 75 games this year, which would be one more than Troy Weaver won in 4 years in Detroit. Which is, look, it's not the most likely outcome, but mathematically, it is more than possible. This team is on track to win 64 games right now. So if they were to win 64 and then make the NBA Finals, win one game, they would have overtaken Troy Weaver's 4 years in Detroit. How incredible is that?
Mike, what are those FanDuel NBA championship odds that Jasper maybe just referenced a moment ago?
Wow, well, I'm glad you asked, Aaron. What a great segue.
I'm curious.
That's a softball lob the size of like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day balloon. So the odds shifted a little bit after the deadline. So here's where it currently stands. The Thunder are still the favorites at plus 110. The Denver Nuggets are second at plus 700. Then it's a glut of five teams. On my glass, I can't see. Plus 1,400, the San Antonio Spurs, the Boston Celtics, the Detroit Pistons, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, all tied at plus 1,400. The Knicks are below that, and then the Houston Rockets after that. So certainly we wouldn't have guessed the Pistons would have tied for the third best odds to win the NBA Finals a year ago, but here they are. So I guess it's less so the question of their odds, but the teams that are around them as well. The Cavs had to have jumped up after their trade. I don't know how Boston is still there. I mean, I know that Vooch is a nice player, but they don't have Jason Tatum. San Antonio, second best team right now in the West, but Denver's kind of sneaky there, plus 700. What do you guys think of the Pistons odds first at plus 1,400 and then some of those odds around them?
Well, look, I don't think that they did anything at the deadline that should have swung their odds massively one way or the other. So I'm not surprised that they're kind of in like that second-ish, maybe third-ish tier of like favorites to win it. So I'm not surprised that the Pistons specifically didn't really move all too much. I think that's kind of where they belong. Like, I think Cleveland and New York and maybe Boston. I don't know how I feel about Boston having equal odds. I think that's kind of contingent on Jason Tatum coming back. But then you're asking Jason Tatum coming off a very serious injury to play high-level basketball in high-intensity situations in a playoff setting. I don't know if that's really all that realistic. And I don't know if Nikola Vucevic joining them is like something that really moves the needle for their title odds either. I think that's where the Pistons belong. I agree that I think Denver is very, very much a championship contender if they can get and stay healthy. They've played a lot of games without Cam Johnson. They've played a lot of games without Aaron Gordon. Obviously, they were just without Nikola Jokic for a long, extended period of time. So if they get those guys back, if they're healthy, I think they deserve to be in that top three of final contenders. But for Detroit specifically, nothing they did at the deadline should have swung where they stood one way or the other.
Yeah, for me, I think I feel pretty much the same way. Detroit is essentially in a slightly better position than they were going into the trade deadline. And I don't really look at anything that happened at the trade deadline in the Eastern Conference, at least, changing my opinion on where I think they can go this season. Look, Vucevic is an interesting player for Boston. He is somebody that has historically torched the Pistons. That is, I think, something for concern. In terms of the New York Knicks, they pick up Jose Alvarado, but that is not, for me, a trade that really moves the needle. I know James Harden is obviously a huge name. I actually have to be honest with you. I think I fear the Cavaliers less than I did if they had a healthy Darius Garland instead of James Harden in the playoffs. I just think that while Garland's not a good defender by any means, I think Harden is in many ways more exploitable by the Pistons' play style, offensively and defensively, than Garland is. Garland, has had good games against the Detroit Pistons. I think Harden is more easy for the Pistons to defend against in a lot of ways because of his game. Now go watch him, foul every Piston out in the playoff series this year. But ultimately, yeah, I still think this is where Detroit belongs. If you look at, NBA.com, their net ratings, defensive ratings, all those things, since December 1st, the best three teams in the league are Detroit, Boston, and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And frankly, Detroit and Boston are the top two of those three. Detroit, number one in the league in defensive rating, number three in net rating. Boston leads the league in net rating in that time period. And the Pistons have the best record at 21-8, with the Celtics being 22-9. So I think for me, yeah, this seems right. This is where the Pistons belong. And I don't see that as being very different moving forward.
Well, we had some trades around us in the Eastern Conference that are certainly going to impact things. You already hit on one of them, and that's James Harden to the Cleveland Cavaliers. We're going to talk about probably that at some point, at least a few of the moves across the league. But we're going to be talking about the Pistons getting Kevin Huerter. And those odds, they did shift a little bit. The Cavs were suddenly the favorites to win the East, and then now they've gone back to just, I think they're slightly behind the Pistons, just barely. But thank you to our sponsor, FanDuel, for having all the information readily available so that Aaron can lob it up and I can dunk it home. Classic Miami Heat alley-oop. Okay, let's talk about the lone Pistons move. And I know that this is probably going to irk some people, but I get why they did it. The Pistons, and actually by the time you are listening to this, I believe you'll already have seen Kevin Huerter play for the Pistons because he is available tonight. But the Bulls, the Wolves, and the Pistons agreed to a multi-team deal that sends Jaden Ivey and Mike Conley to the Bulls, Kevin Huerter and Dario Saric to the Pistons. The Pistons also get a protected first-round swap from Minnesota in that deal, whatever that's worth. These are two teams that are angling for the playoffs. This is not going to be a high end first. So the first round pick is a little bit deceiving in there. But this is obviously a big shift. This is the Pistons not admitting defeat, but admitting the need for change for Jaden Ivey. And we can unpack that whole ordeal because I feel like we've been talking about Jaden Ivey
that's
going up and down.
Yeah, that's where we should start. And
yes,
let's set the table on that, right? So, and this comes from a person that has remained steadfast going into the season on giving Jaden Ivey a chance to reacclimate himself, to come back healthy, to see if he can get his footing, to play through some early mistakes, and then figure out if he can contribute to this Detroit Piston team before the franchise has to make a decision on whether or not they want to extend him in the upcoming offseason or not. And so this comes from a person that wanted Jaden Ivey to succeed in Detroit. And he makes a ton of sense. And what he, in theory, should have brought to the Pistons is something that I still feel like they're coming out of the deadline needing on this roster and now missing on this roster. And they're not missing it because they lost Jaden Ivey. They're missing it because Jaden Ivey never got to that point where he was giving them the on-ball creation, the paint penetration, the breaking down the defense and getting to the rack while also being a consistent three-point shooter. He has very clearly looked a step slow this year. He has not had that same athleticism that is a core part of his game, a core part of his overall strengths as a player. The three-point shooting for Jaden Ivey has improved, but the Detroit Pistons at this point don't need someone who is turnover prone, can't break down a defense, and is a around league average, slightly above league average three-point shooter currently. And so that's where Jaden Ivey was. And then the Pistons had to go into the offseason knowing that Jalen Duren is due up for an extension, Asar Thompson will be eligible to sign an extension, an Isaiah Stewart extension is looming, knowing that they have all these guys to pay, and then also have Jaden Ivey on the table and Jaden Ivey's contract on the table. And so I think this was Detroit understanding that, hey, Jaden needs a change of scenery. He needs to go to a situation where, kind of like Jonathan Kuminga, he'll be able to fail. He'll be able to make mistakes, but that runway will be there for him to continue to play through those mistakes, to develop on-court, in-game reps. It just wasn't going to happen here in Detroit for how quickly this team has jumped from the bottom of the conference to the top of the conference. And so as unfortunate as it is, and as much as myself and many, many others wanted it to work out for Jaden Ivey in Detroit, at the end of the day, it did make sense to move him. If you don't like the package, if you don't like what they got back in return, that is a different story. It's a different conversation. But understanding why the Pistons had to make the decision to move off of Jaden Ivey, that's really why it had to happen. There was just a lot at play, and some of it's not Jaden Ivey's fault. Some of it obviously is. But the Pistons had accelerated very quickly from the time that he went down with his season-ending injury on January 1st, 2025, to when he returned in 2026 for the Detroit Pistons.
Aaron, I'm glad you said the words "had to happen," because that is the reality of this situation. It had to happen. The Pistons could not hold on to Jaden Ivey, and there's a few reasons why. And I know that this is like a thing that really has been a big point of contention amongst the Pistons fan base over the last few months, really for the last year or so. But the reality is that the framework of the discussion has been wrong. It's always been about what is Jaden Ivey doing on the court? You know, what's the impact he's bringing? Is he good or is he bad? And that was never the issue there. It's not, well, he's shooting well from three. It's not that he's having an offensive impact. It's the things that he's doing. And you said some of them right there. He's not the player that Detroit drafted. Look, he never improved as a finisher. In fact, he got worse. He never improved his ball handling. In fact, he got worse. And if all that the Pistons saw this year was that he was lacking explosiveness and athleticism, I think there was a chance they still could have held on to him. But the reality is he had to change his entire play style in order to be a somewhat effective player in the NBA. He had to become more of a perimeter-focused player because he wasn't able to get into the paint and score efficiently on a consistent basis. And he hasn't been able to for his 4 years in the league now. That's just like the play reality of it. There's also the financial reality of it. And you talked about that a little bit as well, Aaron. He would have had a $30 million cap hold this offseason. There was no way that unless they were planning on bringing him back at a contract that worked for him, they could continue to do this. They needed to get something back for him because, as you said, look, now you have Jalen Duren is expiring this year. They have to re-sign him as a restricted free agent. But now with Kevin Huerter, who's making $18 million this year, and Tobias Harris, who's making $26 million this year, coming off of the books, you have $44 million to work with. 46 if you count Javonte Green coming off of the books as well. So you have an opportunity this offseason to bring on a big difference-making contract onto this team. And it's clearly been this offseason where the Pistons have decided to say, hey, this is where we're going to make our consolidation move. They've told us as much the entire time. So unless they were going to bring back Jaden Ivey, they couldn't financially make it work this offseason. They were going to have to either renounce his cap hold or bring him back for whatever he signed as a restricted free agent. And it was clear that they weren't going to be able to do that if they are taking that next step into contention. They don't have space for a guy who's trying to make his way back into being the player that he was supposed to be originally. So, yeah, regardless of what you think of the return, a deal had to happen. This had to be done. And the return of Kevin Huerter, the return of, which, you know, Mike, you said it's not that big a deal. I actually do happen to think that the potential to move up, 6, 7, 8 spots in this year's draft, I do think that is something. There's a difference between the 28th, 29th pick and the 20th pick in the NBA draft. There really is, especially in a loaded one this year. So I think the return that they got back was essentially they're saying, hey, we're getting a guy in Kevin Huerter who is going to give us ideally a little bit more than Jaden Ivey was giving you this year on both ends of the court, and also is an expiring contract that we are going to be able to determine whether we're going to bring him back or not, and it's not going to affect our cap space for this offseason. So I think for me, the way I look at this deal, and we said it last week on the podcast, it had to happen. If the Pistons were going to make a trade, it was going to involve Jaden Ivey, regardless of whether they decided to change their plans and buy in for this playoff run or not.
And they didn't buy necessarily. They tweaked. They modified. They kept their cap space open for the summer, which seems like a lot of teams are doing. They added a guy who impacts you right now in a way that Jaden Ivey just wasn't able to do. Herter is a deep threat. He's going to provide spacing. He hasn't been a particularly good three-point shooter this year, but he has a history of being like a 37, 38% shooter from deep. He's at 31 point something this year, whatever.
He's at 31.4%. He has not shot. And I think, Mike, it is important. We should talk about Kevin Herter more, but like he has not shot well from three over the last 2.5 seasons.
Yeah, this is an ongoing thing. I have his stats pulled up. Not particularly good, but he provides a level of spacing. Should get more spacing playing next to Cade. So if we jump right into Kevin Herter and what he provides immediately beyond spacing, how is this going to change the way the Pistons look heading into the playoffs and then in a potential playoff setting where you're playing the same team, potentially 7 games in a row, and it's all about matchups. It's all about the chess match of putting which players in which position against the opposing team's players and schemes. How does Kevin Herter fit into that, if at all?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that Kevin Herter shifts all that much for Detroit. This is a guy that, has had a poor shooting season for the last few years. He's kind of hovered from around league average in the 2023-2024 season. He's trended down ever since. So they are losing. It's actually, if you look at the per 36, Jaden Ivey was shooting just as many, actually a touch more threes per 36 than Kevin Herter was this season. And Jaden Ivey was shooting them at a much better clip than Kevin Herter was. So that is a loss in theory there. Now Kevin Herter does provide some additional movement shooting. Like he'll be able to do some things running off screens and things like that I think can be helpful for Detroit's offense. I know something Jasper's pointed out and a few other people have pointed out as well is how efficient Kevin Herter's been inside the arc. So as we've seen his outside shooting maybe take a little bit of a hit, he has become a much more efficient scorer from inside, which is something that Jaden Ivey wasn't doing. He gives them size. He gives them experience. I'm not necessarily thrilled about it. Like in a perfect world, if they did make a trade with Chicago, it was going to be for Coby White. I understand the circumstances of it's a contract year for Coby White. He wants to get paid. He probably wants to get traded to a team that is going to extend him. And I don't know if Detroit, with all of the guys that they have to sign and extend this offseason or the offseason after, and plus the idea of adding to this team, I don't know if Coby White was the guy that they wanted to lock in that regard. But I think Kevin Herter's fine. I think maybe the real win is the opportunity to move up 4 to 5 slots in the first round of this year's draft. It is a very good draft class. And so if Detroit is able to pick at 23 or 24 instead of 29 or 30, there is some value in that. And maybe that is valuable enough to then trade that first round pick again in the offseason and use it in that way. So Trajan Langdon made it very clear. He has something about him is he's very open. He's very honest. He does not fluff. He does not give you BS. He's going to be patient. He's going to let this roster, and this core play and develop and give them that chance to compete. And they are going to maintain their flexibility until that time that they decide is the time to push those chips in for a big play. That's when they'll do it. And he maintained that at the deadline here, whether you're happy with it or not. He is an honest man, and he stayed true to his word here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point I want to touch on for just a second before I get to Kevin Herter. But I think that's a really, really excellent observation you made there, Aaron, in terms of that being an appealing asset and one that they could potentially even improve upon. Look, we know that outside of young players, the cupboard was left pretty bare in terms of assets for Trajan Langdon when he came into the Detroit Pistons organization. So he's had to use what he has, which is cap space and second round picks, essentially, to the best of his ability. You look at, moving up in the draft. Well, maybe you take that pick and you package it with a couple more second round picks and you move up a little further in the draft this offseason as well. Or that just becomes a more appealing asset that you can package with a potentially tradable player in like Karis LeVert or Duncan Robinson or some more second round picks. In addition for something to acquire another player via trade this offseason. So yeah, it's just another asset, and it's they're doing the best they can with what they were given at the beginning. Like, that's all they got to work with. It's players, which if they're good, you don't want to trade them. And if they're bad, you're not going to get a lot back for, and your own picks. So tough situation there. And one I think people have kind of lost sight of at the trade deadline, which is like the Pistons. As you become a contending team and you take on contracts, your only real opportunities to improve are via the draft, especially in the first round. The Pistons don't have excess first round draft picks. They didn't even have one this year. So they need to value those as much as they can. In regards to Kevin Huerter, yeah, Aaron, I'm kind of with you. I'm not wowed by this move by any means. I think that for me, I look at it somewhat similar to the way Duncan Robinson replaced Malik Beasley during the offseason, where you're getting a player who's there to provide you with the same type of things that Jaden Ivey was providing you, but hopefully with a little bit more. He is an upgrade defensively. That's not saying a ton, but he is a little bit better of a defender. He is, as you said, a far better interior scorer. And I think that's one of the things that with Duncan Robinson, we really have noticed this year, his ability to get to the paint, draw fouls, create a little bit for others. I think that when you look at what Jaden Ivey was doing in terms of passing this year versus what Kevin Huerter has done over the course of his career, unfortunately, I do think Kevin Huerter is a better creator at this point for others. He is a better dribbler. His catch and shoot numbers this year are quite bad. He is shooting very, very poorly from three, and I think that's definitely a concern. Only shooting 31% from three is really bad, especially on catch and shoots. But he's going to have more spacing than he's had in the last couple of years. Let's not forget, he's playing with the Kings and the Bulls, for Christ's sake, instead of an elite offensive point guard and Trae Young, where he was basically a 40% shooter from deep while he was in Atlanta. So I think that, there is a hope that you give him another elite creator in Cade Cunningham, and he's able to get better looks. He's able to convert more. He has been shooting 40% from the corners. I think one of those things you look at, a lot of the Pistons' last second shots come from the corners with guys like Ron Holland or Isaiah Stewart. If you can replace those looks with Kevin Huerter look, I think that's definitely a win for you as an offense. And the thing that he really provides a major upgrade for in regards to Jaden Ivey is that paint scoring. The Pistons, we know they make their living in the paint. They are one of the most prolific paint teams, but in terms of restricted area efficiency, they're actually in the bottom third of the league. I believe they're like 16th or 17th in the league in terms of field goal percentage in the restricted area at 67%. Jaden Ivey career 60% from the restricted area. Very, very, very bad. Kevin Huerter this year is shooting 75% from the restricted area. So he really represents a significant upgrade for them in that department. And I think that's really what this team has decided, and what they've shown you with this trade deadline is they are going to play to the strengths of the team they have right now. They're not going to listen to everybody else that says you need to get a really, really high volume 3-point shooter. I think we are in agreement when we say Kevin Huerter does need to get up 3-point shots in order for this trade to really represent an upgrade, especially when it comes to the playoffs. And you're looking at Duncan Robinson as your only other proven floor spacer right now. I think we're all in agreement. The volume's got to be there. But there are other facets of his game that he can provide a real utility to this team in. So ultimately, I think we are going to look at this at the very least as a small upgrade on the margins. And if he's able to return to his form as a shooter and put up something like 6, 7, I think 7's maybe a little high. Let's say 6.5 3-point attempts per game for this team. I think you're looking at somebody that has a potential to really, really help you in a lot of ways. So I'm not blown away by it. I am definitely a little bit nervous, but I think that there is a real possibility for Kevin Huerter to be not a huge difference maker, but enough of a difference maker to get you past where you are right now in the Eastern Conference. Look, you're the best team in the East right now, but there are teams that are not far behind you. I think somebody like Kevin Huerter, if he can be a consistent scorer from both inside and outside, can really, really be a difference maker in those kinds of series when it gets down to, a couple of possessions here or there.
Yeah, you talk about volume, 3-point volume. I think the Pistons are 28th in 3-point attempts per game. So they are already a low volume 3-point shooting team. And they were that last year, even with Malik Beasley going off all season. But when it comes to the playoffs, those sorts of things matter in that shorter, 7-game series where, again, it's all about matchups and it's all about, like, every possession is going to matter. We saw it against the Knicks. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s 3 doesn't go. He gets called for foul. Those small things do matter. So a Kevin Huerter, as a spacer, as your second key spacer on the wing, that could matter in a playoff series. It's all about matchups. And clearly the Pistons are happy with what they have going into a series like that. They're comfortable with who they have, the vets that they have. So I think Huerter adding on to that, it's like you said, it's not going to blow anybody away, but it is like a small tweak that in a 7-game series could prove to be impactful even a few times.
And Mike, I think one of the things that people kind of miss when they look at where teams stack up in league rankings is they overlook the margins. Like, for example, the Pistons are the second best defense in the league. The Toronto Raptors are the 8th best defense in the league, and they're the second best defense in the East. But the margin between the Pistons and the Raptors at 2 and 8 is equal to the margin between the Raptors and the 22nd ranked defense in the NBA. The margin of difference for the Pistons, yes, they are one of the lowest teams in 3-point field goals made this year. But the difference between them being one of the worst and being slightly above league average, Mike, it's less than 1.5 3-point makes per game. So I think that's a really important point you're making there. It is the marginal thing right there. Even a marginal upgrade for this team in a certain area can ultimately represent a really big upgrade in the aggregate. So I think that's something that the Pistons are looking forward to from Kevin Huerter, and I think it is something that is on the table for him. I don't think it's maybe you disagree with this, Aaron. I don't think it's crazy unrealistic for the Pistons to expect Kevin Huerter to just give you one more 3 per game than you were making, and now all of a sudden you're not one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league. You're just an average 3-point shooting team in the league. You're not one of the middle of the pack restricted area scoring threats. You're a top 10 restricted area scoring threat. And over the course of a 7-game series, Mike, like you said, those can be the difference makers.
Yeah, look, I mean, they're going to need Kevin Huerter. Like, this rotation is going to need him to be a factor on both sides of the court, because Detroit doesn't really play guys that don't defend, or at least try to defend, but they're going to need him to provide offensively. And I think part of the mindset in this trade is look at the type of success that Jaden Ivey and Duncan Robinson and some of these guys, Tobias Harris, have had getting open 3-point looks. Let's get Kevin Huerter, who over his career has been a solid 3-point shooter. Let's get him into the system. Let's play him alongside one of the best facilitators in the game, who defenses always collapse on, they double, whatever, and let's see if he can hit some shots. And that's a worthy risk to take with a guy like that. So I guess part of the hope for Detroit is, yes, can he make threes? Can he take threes? But can he make them at a better clip than what he's shot the last few years based on his overall total body of work? So I think that's part of the hope there.
So we're all whelmed with the Kevin Huerter trade, or rather acquisition, but there are some reasons to be slightly underwhelmed with how the trade deadline went. And we talked about this. The Pistons still haven't addressed what we felt is their biggest concern, not for the long term necessarily, but for the short term, is they could have really used a backup ball handler. And as good as Dennis Jenkins has been, and his contract will presumably be converted into a standard at some point, I would imagine Dario Saric is going to get cut loose and Jenkins fills that spot. When you're going into the playoffs with a former two-way guy who's been very good, not to take anything away from Dennis Jenkins, he's been very good, and Karis LeVert as your two backup ball handlers, that does, as someone who watched this with JB, that does leave me somewhat concerned in that regard, because I watched a similar Cavs team that was very good last year, historic, with very limited ball handlers, get absolutely run over in a playoff series against a team that had a lot more playmaking. So I'm personally a little concerned that the Pistons did not address the backup ball handler. Was there any area that you guys were disappointed in or wish the Pistons would have done something with?
I'm in agreement there. I mentioned Kobe White as a guy that I would have liked Detroit to get their hands on. I think Colin Sexton would have been another good one. I said before the show, just chatting with you guys, that I think if they could have found a way to add Anthony Simons, that would have been something that really intrigued me. Obviously, Boston was looking for a very specific player archetype, at the center position to add to their roster, which is something that I'm not sure Detroit would have been able to accommodate in the way that Chicago was able to. But I think getting a guy that is experienced, that can put the ball on the floor, that can create for others, but also knock down shots himself, make difficult shots, that really has value to me, and it has value in the playoffs. And so I think you're asking a lot. As good as Dennis Jenkins has been this year, I think it's going to be asking a lot. And maybe this is part of the patience and the long-term thinking that Trajan Langdon and this front office and this organization has really bought into. And they purposely didn't really add there because they want Dennis Jenkins to be that. And they're going to make him experience that this year, whether there's pains with it or not, because it will be better for the team in the long term. That goes a little bit against my philosophy. Of course, I'm not an NBA executive, but from my point of view, when you have a chance to win, when you have a team that looks like it could be a title contender in a conference that will probably only get better as time goes by, it's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, in my opinion, when you don't go out and you don't make a move that really fortifies you, gives you a little bit of an extra lift. But the Pistons have chosen their path. They have stuck by that path no matter what. And so in my mind, I think this is saying we are trusting what we have. We are trusting our staff to continue to develop someone like Dennis Jenkins. Maybe even there will be a chance for Marcus Sasser now a little bit with Jaden Ivey gone. But they're gonna go down that path and say there might be some issues this year. It may not be pretty. We may run into some issues in the playoffs. But for the long-term health of this team, we're going to sign Dennis Jenkins. We're going to get him probably on a rather friendly deal if it's 2-3 years. And we're going to develop him into someone that can be a real player for us, and he's going to play playoff minutes for us because we've put ourselves in that position where he has to. And then, of course, you have Karis LeVert, who we know JB Bickerstaff is incredibly, incredibly fond of. He very much trusts him. It is, the JB Bickerstaff way of trusting a veteran, letting a veteran make mistakes, giving that veteran the room to operate and play through, issues and mistakes that he makes, because in the end, JB Bickerstaff feels that guy is going to overall have a positive impact on the team and on the court. And so the Pistons have put themselves in a spot where Karis LeVert and Danis Jenkins are going to have to give them meaningful reps, meaningful possessions in the postseason. And all we can do at this point, unless they go out and add something in the buyout market, is sit here and wait for it to play out.
Yeah, Aaron, my feelings are pretty similar to yours. I'm also personally disappointed, but it's easy for me to accept what they've decided to do because this is what they've said they were going to do. This is the plan that they've laid out since day one. And it's one that to me is not obviously wrong. Like there was not an obviously right or wrong answer for what the Pistons should do at the trade deadline. It's clear to me they have that plan. They were not going to take on a big long-term contract. They want to maintain flexibility this offseason and the offseason after that as well. And to me, I think it's eminently reasonable for this front office to go, look, this team, yes, they played great against the Knicks last year in the playoffs, but they have not won a playoff series yet. And I think it's fair for a front office to question, with this young of a core that's never won a playoff series, do we really think that, bringing on somebody who's going to either already be signed for the next few years, like Michael Porter Jr. or Lauri Markkanen or whatever, or B, is only going to be okay with this trade if they're getting an extension pretty much guaranteed to them, like it sounded like Kobe White and his representation were saying in getting traded from Chicago, because he's also an expiring contract. But there was some talk that his representation was saying, if you're not going to offer Kobe White like a $30 million a year extension, don't trade for him. Should you do that? Should you not do that? That's the business side of the NBA. That's something, again, where I don't think there's necessarily always a right or wrong answer. But to me, yeah, I'm a little personally disappointed. I'm with you, Aaron. I wanted them to maybe not push their chips all the way in, but take a little bit of a swing and see, hey, it's unlikely. There's not a lot of history of teams doing this, but maybe we can do it. There's not a lot of history of teams improving their win total 3x from one year to another and then winning the East the year after that. But look where the Pistons are. So I think ultimately, yeah, I can respect that they have this plan. I can respect that they're sticking to it. I can accept it because I think that even if it's maybe not the exact direction I would have gone in, it is a reasonable one that you can see a long-term solution and outcome with, unlike the Troy Weaver era. And yeah, that's ultimately where I stand on it. I am worried about Danis Jenkins and Karis LeVert being my secondary ball handling options in the playoffs. But I will say, I do think Kevin Huerter at this point in their respective careers is a better creator than Jaden Ivey is. And I trust him with his own dribble, and I trust him to create for others more. That's not saying a ton, but it is something. And from what I see, the Pistons are kind of just trying to make up for all the flaws they have in terms of individual talent in the aggregate. And I can respect that for now. So,
well, they are leading the Eastern Conference by 5.5 games over the Boston Celtics. They have a 7.5 game lead over the Cavs. And I think the Knicks, they're tied. So plenty of games left. But let's talk about the schedule, because the Pistons have a bit of a tough schedule coming up outside of Washington, who I don't know who's going to win. but you all will know listening to this. I would wager the Pistons are going to win. I think they're 14.5-point favorites. Kate is questionable at the time of this, so maybe that has some implication of the final score. But regardless of that, they play Washington. Then Friday, on the second half of the back-to-back, they play the Knicks. Then they play Charlotte, who is no easy out at this point anymore. They're one of the most fun teams in the league to watch, and they made a pretty nice move to go and get Kobe White. I thought the Hornets had a very fun deadline. They play Toronto, who's in the thick of it in the playoffs. They play the Knicks again. They play those Chicago Bulls, and Jaden Ivey is active for tonight's game. San Antonio, Oklahoma City, then they play Cleveland, Orlando, and then Cleveland again, and then San Antonio. So they don't really have they don't play a truly bad team until March 7th against Brooklyn. Chicago, you can debate if they're bad or not. On any given night, they're
Chicago
bad.
Too, but
They're bad.
Yeah.
They're not Brooklyn bad, but they are bad.
Jalen Duren might have a 30-30 game, considering the only center on their roster is Nick Richards. So
I was going to say, they might be Brooklyn bad by the
Jalen
time you
Smith.
get there.
Oh, are you talking about the Nets or the Bulls?
No, I'm saying the Bulls might be Brooklyn Nets level bad by the time you play them. They could. We'll see what happens.
Jaden Ivey revenge game. I don't know what you all are talking about.
Kevin Huerter revenge game. Come on, Mike.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. So point being, they really don't have a easy schedule until second week of March. It's a tough gauntlet. Lots of playoff teams, lots of teams in the Eastern Conference multiple times over that could impact the standings. How are you guys feeling with this 12-ish game stretch of mostly playoff teams, and at the very least, mostly play-in teams and playoff teams?
I mean, Mike, for me, I think this is the Pistons, easily the Pistons' toughest stretch of the season, and their most important as well. This is where you're going to see exactly what this team is going to be by the end of the season, because you do have 2 games against the New York Knicks. That right there gives you either an opportunity to put them away and totally eliminate them as a threat to your 1 seed, or let them back into that race. You have several of the toughest teams in the NBA. And let's not forget, hey, we should mention, they just beat the Denver Nuggets on Tuesday night. That was a very hard-fought game with Nikola Jokic back. So this has been an extended stretch of very, very difficult games. This is, to me, where you're going to see exactly what this team is made of, because all of these teams are difficult to play other than the Wizards and the Bulls. They all can beat you. And depending on how you come out of this stretch, you're going to either know if you're going to win 60 games or not. That's basically how this stretch is going to determine. Because look, if you go, let's say 8-5 in this 13-game stretch, I think you're feeling very, very good. But there's also a real possibility that you go on like a 4-9 run here, and then you're looking at this team a little bit differently now that you've integrated Kevin Huerter into the mix. So yeah, this is a really, really big part of the Pistons schedule, and one I think, like, for all the doubters, this is either going to prove you wrong or give you a lot more ammunition going forward.
Yeah, look, I'm excited for this stretch. I think it's great that, I mean, how it essentially works for Detroit is they, going back to January 27th, so the end of January, from here on out, they pretty much get all of the West's best teams within a month's stretch. I mean, they've now played the Nuggets twice, which they ended up, even though they probably didn't deserve to win either of the games, they ended up winning both those games. They're going to get San Antonio twice in a pretty short order, and same with Oklahoma City. So I think it's a great opportunity for a team that is a championship contender. And I kind of, like, my heart flutters a little bit every time I say that, because it just doesn't feel normal to say that with the Detroit Piston team that I've spent the large majority of my life giving up 140 points a game and winning 19 to 32 games every season. But they're going to see where they stack up against the other teams that they could end up playing in the final 4 to 7 games of the 2025-2026 NBA season. And so I think that's going to be a great challenge for them. And it's also going to be an opportunity for them to really learn where they stand. And there's nothing better than that at this point in the season. The Pistons don't need to be playing Brooklyn and Washington and Milwaukee. Like, they don't need to play all these bottom of the barrel teams, because that doesn't help them prepare and get ready and adjust for what it's going to be like when the ball tips off in mid to late April and it's the first round of the NBA playoffs and you're playing the Knicks or you're playing the Raptors or the Magic. I mean, they haven't even seen Toronto yet this year. Like, they're going to finally get to play Toronto, who's been very good this year. So it's a great stretch for Detroit to figure out where they stack up against teams that they are going to see in the playoffs. And if all things go right, see in the NBA Finals.
Also great is that 4 of those next 11-ish games are on national television. They're on ESPN. Even the Brooklyn game is on NBA TV, which is like half national TV. But they have 2 on Prime Video, 1 on Peacock, and they play the Cavs on ESPN. So national audience as well. They're finally getting the recognition. It's a tough stretch of games. Jasper, I'm with you. I think this is the determining factor if you're going to get to 60 wins or not. At the end of it, though, you want to come out of this healthy. You want to come out of this with an idea of, if you are going to lose some games, have to learn where those deficiencies are at. Not that they're going to be big players in the buyout market, but there is plenty of season left to figure things out. Still have the All-Star break coming up as well. It'll be a fun stretch. I'm really looking forward to it. You're going to learn a lot about this team, I think. You guys are right. You're going to learn a lot about this team in crunch time situations against some of the best teams in the league. And we'll have to see where they come out after this in terms of the standings, because Boston is right there. I mean, 5.5 games is not a lot. 7.5 games is not a lot at this juncture of the season. There's still lots of basketball left. So we'll have to see. Guys, any other thoughts on the trade deadline?
I was just going to say, Mike, I think also, last thought on that stretch of the schedule, it's also one where it's, the games you have to win are very interesting. You could lose both games to San Antonio and the game to Oklahoma City and say the game to the Hornets and still come out of this stretch saying, we did what we needed to do because you swept those 4 games against the Cavs and the Knicks. You could conversely beat San Antonio twice and beat Oklahoma City and say lose all 4 of those games. And now all of a sudden you're looking at your place in the Eastern Conference and you're saying, this isn't quite as safe. Knicks are 5.5 games behind. They win both those games. Guess what? Now they're 3.5 games behind you. And that's even without anything else going wrong. The Cavs, same thing. Like, if you lose those 4 games or even 3 of those 4 games, now all of a sudden this very, very comfortable lead you have for the 1 seed is starting to look a little bit more precarious, especially as teams like Boston continue to play well. So, yeah, really, really big stretch.
And the Knicks and Cavs were 2 of the teams that really floundered for a majority of the season. They looked all out of sync. I think the Knicks are better with Karl Anthony Towns on the bench. And both those teams are starting to round into form. The Knicks are playing very good basketball. I think the Cavs have won 10 of 12. And they're in the midst of a 5-game West Coast swing. So they're starting to play better. Not the time to take the foot off the gas by any stretch. But guys, any other thoughts on the deadline in general? What was the most surprising move across the league?
I'll say in general, I think that the teams in the East that Detroit's competing with, they got better, right? I think Cleveland gets immensely better from adding James Harden, Dennis Schroeder, and Keon Ellis into the fold. And I think it gives them a shakeup that the team in general, and Mike, you would be way better to speak on that more than I, but it feels like it was something that was needed. It just, what they were doing, the Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell combination, it just felt stale. It felt like nobody, even those 2, felt it was really all that sustainable, even if they liked each other. Just the on-court, a performance of it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't going to work in the long term. So I think that they needed to do something, and I think they did a good job in doing it. I think Boston, I'm a big fan of what Anthony Simons has done this year. Again, that was a guy that I would have targeted if I were the Detroit Pistons. But I think getting Nikola Vucevic is really something that Boston needed. Like they needed a big that could play real minutes, that has playoff experience. Obviously, he has his shortcomings, but I don't know how sustainable it was for them to play Keita and Luka Garza and that be their center rotation going into the playoffs. So I like that move for them. Jose Alvarado is a good pickup for the Knicks, especially with Miles McBride going down. Obviously, that's not nearly as big of a move as what Boston and what Cleveland did, but I like that. And then it's worth mentioning.
Let me say it. Can I get to say it?
Go.
Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
It was the only one I wanted to say.
It might not work, but it's interesting.
Aaron, I mean, they really I think it's kind of a brilliant move in concept, in theory, because if you compare Sarr and Anthony Davis, that's an incredible front line defensively, and one that I think since you've acquired Trae Young, one that's kind of necessary, one that I think can kind of convince you maybe we can make this work. You look at the other guys that they have, like they have Bilal Coulibaly, like they have kind of some stretchy wings and off-ball guards, and they really didn't give up that much. Like I know that no, dude. I mean, they said like it's 2 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, but it's a 2026 first-round pick from Oklahoma City, which is basically a second-round pick, and a 2030 first-round pick from Golden State, which is top 20 protected. So you're not giving up a top 20 pick for Anthony Davis there. Maybe it doesn't work out, fine, but is it worth the risk? Yeah. Like the Pistons, it's like a what the Pistons did last year with their acquisitions, but like on steroids. You know what I mean?
The potential of going and I would be shocked if Trae Young or Anthony Davis played a game in Washington this year. So the thought of going into next year with Trae Young, Keyshawn George, a top 5 pick, Anthony Davis, and Alex Sarr with Bob Carrington. I don't know what they're going to do with Bilal Coulibaly. Maybe they keep him, maybe they don't. They have some really intriguing pieces, and it's gonna be fun. And I think like you said, they might be able to make it work with Trae Young because Davis and Sarr should be such a really, really strong pairing defensively that they'll be able to cover up some of the issues that Trae Young presents defensively. So I'm in on what Washington did. I think it's also worth mentioning that in the future, this is going to impact Detroit. Indiana going out and getting Zubac was really smart. The protections on that first-round pick are wild.
Crazy.
And if that comes back to bite them in the butt, then I think I might have different thoughts on this trade. But as long as the pick doesn't convey this year, I think that was a really smart move by Indiana. They clearly needed to get a big. They clearly needed a center with Miles Turner out of the picture there. And so now you're looking at, in theory, Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, a top 4 pick, Pascal Siakam, and Zubac as your starting 5 next year, as well as whatever they do in free agency. I think that's a really, really interesting situation playing out there. And then they don't have to commit to paying Ben Mathurin, who just had flashes, but it didn't feel like it was ever going to be perfect for him in Indy.
Benedict Mathurin, traded. Jaden Ivey, traded. Killian Hayes, all-star. That's all I got. That's all I got, fellas.
As I tweeted the other day, I was never wrong. I was just early. On Killian Hayes.
We look
catching up.
We never said he was going to be an all-star for an NBA team,
True.
Right? We said he was going to be an all-star.
Hey, context matters, folks.
Yes. G League star Killian Hayes just tearing it up for the try. I think they put up 155 points in the G League, which is
that's not real.
It's impressive. Yeah, I think Anthony Davis and Trae Young is a fun pairing. Somebody said on Twitter that Anthony Davis had like a down year last year with the Lakers and the Mavs, and that season would still be the best of like any Wizard in the last decade. And it's not even that close. So they definitely get better. They get more fun.
And Keyshawn George is a really, really interesting player. Like,
yes,
he's taking a leap right now, and I think he could take another leap. Like, I'm really interested in him. I think he's like under the radar young guy in the league right now. So I'm really intrigued by Washington. Sorry to cut you off, Mike.
No. You're definitely right. He's a real player. Plus a top 4 pick. It's a little sneaky by the Washington Wizards. It's definitely fun. It was a fun deadline. I think we're a little maybe disappointed with how the Pistons approached it, not getting a ball handler, but I think that Kevin Huerter makes a difference in a playoff setting in a limited space of time. And, don't mess with what's working, right? I mean, they're number 1 in the East for a reason. There's no need to rock the boat if you don't have to rock the boat right now. Guys, any last thoughts before we wrap up this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast?
No, we really should have wrapped after the Killian Hayes comments. So before we go any further, I just think that's where the show should cut off. And maybe in post-production, I'll just cut it off. It'll just fade to black like the Sopranos ending.
You should do like an echo on Killian Hayes all-star, star. And then just fades into black, and then that's how the podcast ends. Well, I'd like to thank my 2 co-hosts of this show, Aaron Johnson, Jasper Apollonia, for joining me again on the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network and brought to you by FanDuel. See you all